there we go. I probably should have recorded the intro as well. I forgot that, so sorry. So with that, I think that's everything. And I'll hand over now to Ina. Please just remember to stay muted. And at the end, we'll do questions. You can raise your hand, or if you prefer, write in the chat. I can look at the questions in the chat as well. Okay, so thank you, Ina. Off to you.
Thank you, Amy. So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I will be talking today about the essentials of duo codes. So to start, I would like to introduce what is GA4GH. So the Global Alliance for Genomic and Health, which is GA4GH, is an international non-profit alliance formed in 2013 to accelerate the potential of scientific research for human health by cultivating a common framework of standards, basically for data sharing. So the Global Alliance work in groups that are called work streams that develop standards, tools, frameworks, and that are designed to overcome technical and regulatory problems. So there are two main work streams. One branch is the foundational work streams provide guidance in the area of regulatory ethics and data security in genomics. And then we have the technical work streams, which are basically people working together to develop technical standards that are of most relevance to the data sharing for medicine and genomics. As you can see, there are several work streams related to clinical and phenotypic data, cloud infrastructure, data use, researcher identities, discovery, genomic knowledge, and large-scale genomics. So for this webinar, we will be focusing our attention to the data use and research identities, which it's called DURI. So what is the DURI workstream? As I said before, it stands for data use and researcher identities. And as its name says, the aim is to create the standards required to facilitate the researcher's identity and the data use. We will understand data use as the informed consent, the informed consent specifying the restrictions for data usage, and the research identity as the collection of researchers that may access a data set, and then they must supply with some credentials. So this workstream provides progress in two areas. One is the establishment of researchers' identities, such as ORCID, and the other one is specifying data use ontology, where the ontology will be used for to state the data use restrictions for data sets, as well as the researcher's purpose for accessing them. And for these two solutions so far, they have 3 approved deliverables. The first one being the data use ontology, which today we will learn the essentials. And just a quick view of the other 2, which are the machine readable consents, that is a collaboration between 2 work streams, DURI, this one, and the ethics. It adopts some data sharing consent language that it maps to DUO to facilitate data discovery, and also it facilitates data access request either for submission and approval. And finally, we have the GA4GH passport that aims to support data access policies and procedures within data access governance system. So now we start with what are the dual codes? As I said before, it stands for data use ontology, and these terms describe data use conditions for research data in health, clinical, and biomedical domains. And it allows to semantically tag datasets with restrictions about their usage, making them automatically discoverable based on the authorization level of users or intended usage. So to put it in a nutshell, the goal of this resource is to allow large data repositories to share the same terminology when describing the data use condition. And so, for example, in the future, we imagine a web service where people can query, and for example, they can submit queries such as return all data sets that can be used for melanoma by a commercial entity. And then after submitting this query, they would receive the list of data sets that they can use under these conditions. So far, there are 3 projects that have implemented duos in their production pipelines. One is the Broad Institute Data Use Overnight System, which is called duos. Here, I would like to make sure that, so there's these 2 things. One is the duo codes, which is the data use ontologies, this standard for data use conditions. And the other one is duos, which is an algorithm developed by the Broad Institute data that it's using duo codes. And the other 2 projects are EGA and the Data Information Systems, known as DAISY. So how did duo codes come about? And so it all began with some of the challenges of sharing human data, which is that clinical research studies each use different language in the informed consent forms. And this means that everything that is written with free text, it's difficult to translate into clear data use conditions, and it's also time consuming. So the DURI workstream created the duo codes that represent data use terms that they come from 3 different evolving efforts to standardize and data use restrictions in the biomedical and genomic research domains. The first one is the NIH DBGAP data use category. So as you may all know, DBGAP is one of the largest repositories at the States. So while ingesting the data in their system, depositors are asked to use a control vocabulary to represent the conditions of the data sets that are deposited at DBGAP. Then there are the consent codes. Consent codes are the evolution of DBGAP approach, where it defines, so it is the same conditions, but it defines a hierarchy on the data use conditions. And then we have the automated data access matrix, which is known as ADAM. This is a matrix of data use, so of data use categories that can be used for, for data use restrictions on a data set, as well as the research purpose. So the ADAM, it's a complementary approach from the 2 previous efforts. And it classifies the data use conditions and permissions with a greater granularity. So it also addresses a larger number of use cases. So thanks to these 3 efforts, the duo codes appeared. And after a long time and a lot of discussions, this is the current list of duo codes. As you can see, they can be separated with by open access and control access. So for open access, there is just one single code, which is no restriction. And for control access, There are two main columns. One is permissions and the other one is modifiers. We would understand permissions as the primary codes and modifiers as the secondary codes, meaning that as you can see, permissions are, there are 4 different codes. One is the general research use, then we have health, medical, biomedical, we have disease specific, and finally we have population, origins, and ancestry. So as you can see, these terms are permitted uses and are on the focus areas of research, while the modifier terms add requirements, limitations, and prohibitions within the permitted boundary. So for example, we could see that there is publication required or geographical restriction. So for permissions, well, I will not be reading all the dual codes, but I would like to read these 4 so you could see that they are quite easy to understand. So for general research use, we have this data use permission indicates that use is allowed to general research use for any research purpose. So this would be the broader dual code. Then we have hierarchical medical, we have health, medical, and biomedical, where the data use permissions indicates that use is allowed for health, medical, and biomedical purpose, but it does not include the study of population, origins, or ancestry. Then going more specific, we have disease-specific research, where the data use permission indicates that the data is allowed provided it is related to a specific disease. So hence, and this duo must always be accompanied by an ontology term stating which is the disease that it is applied. So for that, the DURI workstream recommends using a Mondo term. And finally, we have the population, origins, and ancestry, where the data use permission indicates that the use of the data is limited to the study of population, origins, or ancestry. So how would the dual codes be implemented from an end-to-end scenario? And these can be divided with 4 steps. The first step is the consent form annotation, where the data donors, who are the participants in trials and studies, first agree to the data use purposes described in the consent form they signed, and the dual codes can be embedded directly in the consent form clauses. Then the second step, which is the dataset annotation, where datasets hosted in control access repositories are annotated with dual terms, expressing the data use terms that they must have for the approval of using the data. And also mention that the dual terms can be also added retrospectively for legacy datasets. So you can add, if you already have datasets on a repository, you can ask the repository to add the dual codes to the data. Then the third step is dataset discovery. So for the dataset discovery here, we have a researcher and they can use dual terms to search for datasets with really relevant use conditions in a data repository. For example, they can search for all datasets consented for melanoma research, and this returns only the list of datasets that would be permitted under these data use conditions in a specific. And finally, we have the data access request. So for the data access request, a researcher requests access to the relevant datasets and describe the research purpose using dual terms. This helps to speed up the review process by the DAC. That could be done either manually or using an algorithm such as DUOS. The DAC reviews the access request to determine if the proposed research is consistent with the data use terms, and if so, they can grant access to the data sets. So just say that to this date, at the EGA, this step 4 is not implemented, as the data access requests are not yet translated to Duo codes, but I'm just letting you know that we are working towards that direction. So why are Duo codes useful? There are 3 main features. The first one is that Duo provides a shared understanding of the meaning of the data use categories. So each Duo code was developed by a community consensus and includes a human readable definition, which can be expanded by adding optional comments or examples. So examples of data use. And this allows data committees across different resources to tag their data sets with a common restriction language on how those data can be used. Then we have that Duos is distributed as a machine readable file that encodes how the data can be used and how our researchers intend to use that data. And this links to the third reason, that is that the Duos can be implemented alongside an advanced search algorithm, such as the one developed at the Broad Institute, which is called Duos. Duos allows authenticated users to query and gain access to datasets related to their research. But as far as I know, this algorithm does not take the decision for the DAC. It suggests an outcome comparing the Duo codes, so the DAC can review before finally granting access or revoking access to the request. So now that we know what Duos are, I will be talking about Duos at EGA. So here we have the metadata schema of regular submission at the EGA. We can see different objects linked between them. So where can we find Duo codes here? And the answer is that because Duo codes are related to data use conditions, they have been added to the policy object schema. So a set of Duo codes are added to the policy, and as we can see here, so the Duo code is linked to a policy, which a policy it's linked to a data set. So this brings 2 different scenarios depending on the purpose of your submission. So the first scenario is that you have several data sets under one set of conditions. So here we can see different data sets and a set of Duo codes. Because this is just one, we will need only one policy linking to the Duo codes, and then all data sets can be linked to the same policy. The second scenario is where we have different data sets, but we also have different set of Duo codes. So for that, we will have to register as many policies as sets of Duo codes we have. So in this example, we have 2 different sets of Duo codes, which are different. We have one here and one here. So each set of Duo codes will have their own policy. So this one and this one, and then the right data sets will be linked to the right set of Duo codes. So this is something to take into account during EGA submission. Then currently at the moment, how are Duo codes added to the EGA? So once you have your submission completed, the users have to communicate to EGA Help Desk. Then EGA Help Desk will check the submission, and if everything looks good and it's ready to be released on the web page, they will ask for the duocodes that you would like to link to the data. Then the user will provide the list of duocodes, and the help desk team will add them directly to the web page. So they are also searchable on the EGA web page. So how can duocodes be used at EGA? Here is the display that we have on the EGA webpage of a data set that has been tagged with duocodes. First, we can see some general information about the data set. So here we have the dataset ID, then we have the technology that has been used for the data within this data set. Then we have the number of samples and some description. And here are the data use conditions, so the duocodes. Here we can see that this data set, it's linked, it can only be used for health or medical or biomedical research purpose, which is duocode 6. Then it has some requirements such as project-specific restriction, publication required, and publication moratorium. So if you are interested on this data, for example, and you agree to the data use conditions, you can contact the data owner, whose information is right below here. So you could request access. Okay, so another use is to look for data sets under one specific duocode or data use condition. So here is an example of duocode 7. You go to EGA webpage, and on the search bar, you write the code, which in this case, duocode 7 is the disease-specific one. So here you end up with a list of 368 data sets that are tagged using this duocode. And finally, EGA is working on a new version of the metadata API, and we are planning to add the duocodes. So this means that if you want to look for a list of data sets, for example, that are under a duocode, and you don't want to use the web page, you will be able to query on our metadata API, which is public, and you will end up with the results of data sets in a JSON schema. Finally, here is more information related to duocodes. I would like to say that, so here is the link to the GitHub repository for the duocode team. Here you can find the different versions of duocodes, and then also you have some papers. The one in the middle has been released early this year or late last year. Now I don't really recall, and some webinar from the GA4GH. Thank you for everyone that made this webinar possible, and I think that now we can go for the questions.
Great, thank you, Aina. Actually, so we had a couple of questions already in the chat. Do you want me to read them, or do you guys want to ask them?
I've just opened the chat. Question to Aina: how would the data use conditions duocodes relate to the data access statement, data availability statement? By data access statement, do you mean the data access agreement? So the document that you have to sign for requesting, well, to get access to a data?
That was Anna.
Yeah.
Asklov had asked this question. I don't know if she.
So if
yeah, I can.
Okay.
No, I was more thinking
Thanks.
of data access statements that are, commonly used in when publishing a paper. Then it's often, data access statements for the data that is,
So unfortunately, I'm not quite familiar with the data access statements for a publication. So I'm not sure how to answer this question. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I just thought it might be an overlap, or like how they would relate to each other. So, yeah.
Okay.
So there's another question from Nancy. Would it be possible to search for data sets with specific policies? For example, certain duo conditions. Yes, so this is an example on looking for specific codes. I see that Shell has a question. Also known as data availability statements, maybe in publications.
It was just a comment about the data access statements. So
yeah,
we know them as data availability statements in some point. Sorry, the mic was a bit badly placed.
Yeah, now we hear you.
Yeah, it was just a comment to the first question that often you have this data availability paragraph in papers where you describe that the data is available with this accession number in that repository, and it would make perfectly sense to include duo codes there as well, but I don't think it's commonly practiced yet.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. I can see that Nancy clarified. Can I search for combinations of conditions? Currently, I think that this is not possible, but this is something that we want to implement in the new metadata API.
And Annalisa had a question in the chat. Do
the dual codes refer to the conditions of access of the whole data set? What about the individual level? So far, it is only for data sets, and we understand that all individuals within that data set signed for the same consent agreement on the form, initially on the study. So if these ever change from a specific individual, for now, these individuals should be, so the data should be removed from the data set, because currently everything is on the data set level.
Okay, and Nancy had another follow-up.
Are there codes to describe GDPR requirements for sharing? The answer is no, specifically for GDPR, basically because dual codes are meant to be used worldwide, and the GDPR is specifically, if I'm not mistaken, for European countries. But you could, so this could be related, for example, there are some GDPR that are talking about the geographical restrictions, but everything that it's for personal data, so far we don't have anything in the dual codes. So for managing this personal data.
Okay.
So new question. Are all data sets in EGA now annotated with dual codes? The answer is no. We have over 2,000 data sets annotated with dual codes. And currently, I think that we have a total of 5,000-ish data sets at EGA. So this would be a little bit less than 50%. This is because dual codes were implemented at EGA, let's say 2 years ago, maybe 3, and we already had several data sets, and we are working to contact all users and from legacy data sets to add dual codes. But so far we have 2,000, which is great, and also currently it's not mandatory. So if you are a new submitter and you want to deposit new data to EGA, it is not 100% mandatory to link your data to dual codes, although it's extremely recommended to use them. Do you share this presentation? Yes, absolutely. I will share this presentation with the organization of this event, of this webinar, so they can share it with you, I guess, in an email with, I don't know if the record of this, the recording of this webinar is also going to be shared.
Yes, probably. But then, yeah, to have access to the links would be better to have the presentation itself directly. But yeah, we'll find a way to share it. Okay. And there's another follow-up on the GDPR. Yeah.
This is a hot topic. Would one use VEIS code to indicate that a data access agreement or some sort of required, or is that kind of given that it's always the case? I am not a GDPR expert, so I am not sure how to reply to this question, and also I wouldn't believe me that much, basically because I am not a GDPR expert. So actually, I highly encourage you that if you have any suggestion on things that you find that might be missing from dual codes, to contact the DURI workstream. They are super glad that people want to suggest new things that there might be missing, and you will be here for sure.
But the question is then, in EGA today, are you indicating, or is it kind of taken for granted that any data set in EGA will require a data access agreement, so you don't need to use a dual code to specify it?
Yeah, so it is. So the data access agreement, it's the policy object. So this object is mandatory in the submission. So this is mandatory, but it doesn't mean that it will be translated to dual codes if the user don't provide the dual codes.
But you might have in EGA today, you might have a deposition from, say, an African country. Mm-hmm. And they are not under GDPR, but they still may have a policy, or there may be two cases. The policy might be so open that they would say, we will grant access to anyone that is contacting us and is doing research on this and that, and do not require a additional data access agreement to be signed. So they are not requiring a formal signature to hand out the data. Mm-hmm. While another policy is much stricter, even though they are not GDPR, they are in a different international country depositing data in EGA. We only provide data if the requester is willing to enter a data access agreement with us. And of course, this will be of interest to people searching for data set. Is this additional legal paperwork required or not? And I'm looking over the dual codes. The project-specific dual code might be a very general catch-all thing that, okay, we have project-specific things that you need to adhere to if you would like access. But again, maybe it will not make sense, because then you have to tag maybe, and that's the question, would you then need to tag all EGA datasets with PS, because all of them by the EGA policy not the data owner policy, but EGA policy, is that all the data requesters should have the legal paperwork signed. They should always have a data access agreement signed before you will hand out data to a data requester.
So actually, the data access agreement signed, it's more on the DAC part. So EGA, it's in the EGA, it's completely independent during the data access agreement process. So the EGA itself doesn't really ask for a signed agreement. We assume that if the DAC agrees, then they are okay on the legal part from their institution. But following what you were saying, currently there are some discussions at the EGA where, because there are some dual codes that of how EGA works, they are kind of mandatory, which would be user specific. No, I don't remember what was the name exactly, but there is one that is specific to a person. So this means that the access cannot be shared with other users, but it's basically how the EGA works.
Okay, yeah, because that's very much related to the project specific question. Some of these things are kind of all data sets inside EGA needs to have these ones, and then how informative are they then to put them on? That's
exactly.
Yes.
And on the similar to that, we have this other discussion, which I think that we are pretty clear on which are our so how we think at EGA. It's that as you can see, no restrictions. It's a dual code, and because we are showing all the information, we get requests of people asking us to tag their data sets as no restriction. But this is open access, and EGA is a controlled access repository. So technically, we don't accept no restriction dual codes at EGA, which doesn't mean that other repositories will accept it. But at EGA, this one, at least, it doesn't make much sense.
Thanks.
Okay, let's see if
there's another, from Nancy in the chat.
Is it possible to differentiate using by an institution, for example, a company for profit versus non-profit institution, and the usage itself, either for non-profit or non-profit? So there are modifiers, and these modifiers can be specific for institution, and then you could also add that it's for non-profit.
Okay. That's all we have in the chat for now. Is there anyone who wants to ask another question? Looking for any raised hands. No. Okay. Well, if there's no more, then thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for the discussion, and thanks to Aina for the presentation.
Thank you very much for listening to me.
Okay, so I will stop the recording now. Okay. Bye-bye.